What up, Wizards? It's Dev, Mtg. We like to have magic, and today I got some brand new magic cards to show you, buddy. Now, don't worry, you're not losing it. We're still about 10 days away from Bloomburrow season proper official for realsies, so don't check your watch and try to fix it or anything. You, as usual, are right on schedule. You're killing it. You're doing great. Of course, it's Wizards who threw everything off schedule, because over the weekend at an MTG panel in Amsterdam, they decided to unveil a bunch of brand new cards from not only Bloomburrow, but the set that comes after it too, Duskmourn. So they didn't skimp either. We got like 25 new cards to look at from both of these two sets, so we should probably go ahead and get to it. I respect your time. Let's start with Bloomburrow. Now, to be fair, approximately half the cards we got to see from Bloomburrow are probably not going to be super impactful, but they do give us an idea of what the world and the story and all that are going to look like. So let's take a look at Early Winter as well as Sun Shower Druid. Now, Early Winter is 5 mana, 4 and a black for an instant. You choose one of these two things, either exile a creature or an opponent exiles an enchantment that they control. This is 5 mana, but I guess it's instant speed exile. It's a black card that can hit enchantment, so it's kind of neat, but the price tag is obviously too high for actual playability on this thing. I think it's mostly just meant to show you some of the story elements. There's some climate stuff going on in Bloomburrow. Let's set up some of the conflict here, and let's also, while we're at it, move on to Sun Shower Druid here. Just a single green mana for a 0/2 Frog Druid, and when it enters, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, and you gain 1 life. Noteworthy that you can target opponent's creatures. Nice. Probably don't do that, but you can target your own Frogman. So kind of a 1 mana, 1/3 gain 1 life. I'm a little bit on board with that, to be honest. By the way, don't read me wrong. I'm not saying this is standard playable. Very, very far from it, most likely, unless we're playing exactly the kind of standard I want to be playing. But again, very doubtful. I just like frogs. I can like frogs. But that said, let's hop along here to our next couple of cards. We got to look at Pearl of Wisdom as well as Carrot Cake. Now, Pearl of Wisdom is 3 mana, but not necessarily. It's 2 and a blue for a sorcery that costs 1 less to cast if you control an otter. But you can draw 2 cards with this. So 2 mana, 2 cards. You otter play this, and get ready for that joke a lot there in Bloomburrow previous season. Probably I really can't wear it out too much, because I'm sure you'll hear it half a dozen more times. But you know, you ought to be used to it by now when it comes to bad puns here on the channel. But 2 mana to draw 2 cards is pretty good. Hopefully you don't have to play any bad cards in your deck. Oh yeah, you have to play a bunch of otters. So hopefully they print a bunch of good ones. Now, Carrot Cake over here. This is a magic card. Of all the magic cards that have ever existed, this is one. It's 2 mana, 1 and a white for an artifact, which is also a food. That means you can pay 2, tap it, sack it, gain 3 life. But when it enters and when you sacrifice it, you get yourself a 1/1 white rabbit creature token, and you get to scry 1, which may be the first time I've actually noticed that was on the card, even though I've read it 8 times at this point. I just keep thinking oh, you get a couple of rabbits and a food. But no, actually, you get a couple of scries too. Okay, ETB scry and get a body. All right, it's not too bad for 2 mana. And eventually, when you do sacrifice it, which, keep in mind, you don't have to sacrifice it to its own ability. Just if you sacrifice it to anything, you get a token off of it, which is pretty sweet too. And yes, that was a pun, but you have to have pretty sharp eyes to see it. Now, the best of these lower rarity cards of the day, by a million today, I'm pretty sure, is Might of the Meek. This is a single red mana for an instant that draws a card, but also target creature gains trample until end of turn. It also gets +1/+0 till end of turn if you control a mouse. Now, this one, I get the feeling we're going to see a lot of these, creature type matters sort of cards in this set, but all that said, I don't even think you have to have a mouse to, make this pretty playable, right? Instant speed. Is this just Charge Through? Is that the card I'm thinking about? Charge Through is green, but yeah, it's instant speed, trample ability, plus draw a card, and that card is actually, kind of good some of the time, Monstrous Rage is pretty much always going to be better than this card, don't get me wrong, but instant speed trample, draw a card, that ain't bad, man. You see people play Ancestral Anger every now and again on the arena, and that's basically draw a card, +1/+0 for each ancestral, whatever it's called, and then you also give the creature trample. The problem is this card is at sorcery speed. And the ability to give a creature trample at instant speed is actually amazing. So I'm telling you, man, there's a million times that Monstrous Rage has gotten you after blocks, because it just gives their dude trample at instant speed. It's actually one of the better parts of the whole card. So I wouldn't be surprised if this saw a little bit of play at some point in its life cycle, but maybe Monstrous Rage being the better card keeps it out of contention. That said, maybe it's just copies, potentially 5 through 8 of Monstrous Rage that also draws you a card, which I think some decks will be into, especially all these slick shot decks that need to draw more and more cards. So if you can't tell, I really like the card. What's the next one? Now, the next one is a kind of a big question mark for me because I haven't been able to find like a real answer to this question on the internet unless I'm just a big old Dumbo. So you let me know in the comment section if you know the real answer to this, but they were purposefully, it seemed, very vague during the presentation on this card. But Ravenous Squirrel is going to be a promo in this set, and I have no idea if it's going to be standard legal or not, but it's a card that's been around for a while. It's from like Modern Horizons 2 or something. And it's awesome. If you've never read Ravenous Squirrel, it's a Golgari hybrid, so you can either pay 1 black mana or 1 green mana for a 1/1 squirrel. And when you sack an artifact or creature, this guy gets a +1/+1 counter with no conditions, no restrictions, no once a turn, no nothing like that. But also, if you pay 1 a green and a black and sack an artifact or creature, you can gain a life and also draw a card, which is a really expensive activated ability, but obviously it's pretty decent in squirrel decks and artifact decks and commander decks and stuff like that. So neat little dude here that I'm not, I gotta tell you, I know I'm the content creator here and I should know these things, but I've been looking for this information for 24 hours and they're hiding it from me. I'm just not really sure if this card is going to be standard legal or not, but I do know it's going to be a promo in this set, and if they're not cowards, it will be standard legal. It should be standard legal. I'll go that far. I would love to see this thing in my standard. But we did get to see one total rare from Bloomburrow. That said, this won't be the last card we look at from the Burrow today, but let's take a look at Salvation Swan. Kids, this is 4 mana, 3 and a white for a 3/3 bird cleric with flash and flying. And whenever it or another bird you control enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 target creature you control without flying. Return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a flying counter on it at the beginning of the next end step. So it's just Restoration Angel or whatever. Is it just that exactly that card? I mean, it has a little bit more restrictions. Resto could save a flyer. I think that's basically where it stops. Like, this is not only Restoration Angel at the point of service, like 9 times out of 10, but if you cast more birds, they can also, blink your Thrag Tusk or whatever you're doing with it. And like, there's going to be a card once we get to the Duskmourn cards that probably goes really, really well 3/4 curving into this. So you'll know it when you see it, and I'll probably point it out then too. But this just does really well with all kinds of amazing creatures in standard with ETB triggers. It obviously saves a creature too. It's just a way to blink a creature while also putting a flying body on the table. Flash, it's ridiculous, man. Like, it's a pretty good Magic card when it was a 3/4 flyer. I don't see why demoting it by a point of toughness and making it slightly better, at least in one way, is going to make the card not good. So just keep an eye out. I'm not sure that Restoration Angel is still an amazing Magic card in standard Magic in 2024, 25, whatever, but I mean, we'll give it a shot, right? It's a pretty sweet Magic card, all things considered. But altogether, my favorite of the Bloomburrow cards today, and the ones that I think are going to have the most impact, again, all together in multiple formats, not just standard, but obviously commander when you get a good gander at these, are the villages. These are all uncommon, and there is a cycle of 5 of them, each in mono colors, right? But there's an interesting wrinkle to these. So let's start off with Lilypad Village and Lupin Flower Village, or Lupin, the 3rd Flower Village, I guess. But either way, Lilypad Village is the blue one. This is a land that taps for colorless or taps for blue, but you can only spend that mana to cast a creature spell. Now, if you pay a blue and tap it, you can Surveil too, but you can only activate it if a bird, frog, otter, or rat entered the battlefield under your control this turn. Okay, so let's move on to the white one. Let's look at these as a whole real quick. Lupin Flower Village is a land that taps for colorless or taps for white, and you can spend that only for a creature spell. In this case, you pay 1 and a white and tap it and sack it to look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a bat, bird, mouse, or rabbit card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, we've only looked at 2 out of the 5 of these so far, but you're getting an idea, I think, of how powerful these can be if you're carrying the correct creature types in your deck. Surveil 2, every turn that you cast one of your relevant creature types, That seems pretty fantastic, man. As far as the white one here, I think it's a little bit better, even though it ends up sacrificing itself to use its ability. I still think that it's amazing considering you don't have to have anything on the table. You don't have to have, a creature that just came into play this turn. This is just, okay, I'm out of cards in my hand, or they just swept me, or something like that. I'm playing a mid-range or aggro deck, and I need to find a creature right now. This is going to do that, and actually finds multiple important creatures in Standard, like Deep Cavern Bat or Regal Bunny Corn, and who knows what other, bats, birds, mice, and rabbits are going to be in Bloomburrow. So the set itself is going to bring us a bunch of relevant cards for this to find. In this case, it's pretty easy to tell that Azorius, blue-white, is the bird color pair. So again, keep your eyes peeled for stuff like that as we move through the other 3 of these, which we're going to look at right now. Why don't we do that? Here's Mudflat Village, Oak Hollow Village, and Rockface Village. Now, again, I'll read all 3 of these one after the other, and then we'll go over how I feel about all of these villages as a whole. Now, Mudflat Village is the black one. It's a land that taps for colorless or taps for black. Spend that only on a creature spell. They all say that. But in this case, you pay 1 and a black and tap and sack Mudflat Village to return a bat, lizard, rat, or squirrel card from your graveyard to your hand. Again, Deep Cavern Bat is a really, really important creature in Standard and will probably be the de facto best black 2-drop in Standard, barring anything that gets printed in Bloomburrow once rotation happens. So just the fact that it gets back a Deep Cavern Bat somewhat late in the game, if your opponent is still holding cards, that is a pretty important play a lot of the time. Obviously, it also gets back a Lord Skitter and a bunch of other rats and lizards and squirrels and whatever. So just overall, a really, really sick card. And again, I have to point out that these are all commander playable too, and I think that's kind of obvious. But Oak Hollow Village is up next. This is the green one. And for this one's activated ability, you can pay a green and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each frog, rabbit, raccoon, or squirrel you control that entered the battlefield this turn. So if there's a bunch of ways, or even just one decent way, right, to get a whole bunch of like raccoon or rabbit or frog or whatever tokens into play, we already know there are multiple great ways to get a bunch of squirrel tokens into play, all in one time, basically, right? Chatterstorm and beyond. So, this works with Chatterstorm, if nothing else, in your green commander decks and stuff. But, again, there's going to be plenty of relevant creatures of these types that are going to show up in Standard once Bloomburrow hits. So, although this doesn't look like the most, strong one out of the bunch we've seen so far, it is relatively cheap to use, just like the blue one, and it's going to really benefit these token strategies. So keep those in mind. But Rockface Village is the last one. I said I was going to read them all, and then I just kind of stopped doing that. But anyway, Rockface Village is the red one. It's the last one. It's a land, it taps for red and also taps for color. Spend the red on a creature spell. The activated ability on this one is red tap. Target lizard, mouse, otter, or raccoon you control. Gets +1/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. So again, just a single mana and a tap to use this. It's pretty sweet. And by the way, note that the thing does not have to, unlike, the blue land, for instance, or the green one for that matter. The creature does not have to have entered play that turn. So this is really just as long as you have any of these creature types out, you can pay effectively 2 mana, a red, and tap this land down and give anything +1/+0, which is kind of not great. I won't say it's amazing, but it's definitely a useful ability in aggro decks. Problem is, again, you have to have built your aggro decks around one or multiple of these creature types, and we'll see how good that actually is in the coming environment. But one way or the other, this is one of my favorites in terms of actual ease of use. It's very, very easy to get this thing going, unlike some of the other ones. But overall, I think the black one is almost certainly the most powerful day one of Standard, and the white one is not too far behind. I like a land that can draw me a card. Now, amazingly, that is all they showed us of Bloomburrow, about 12, 13 cards all in all, and 5 of them were from a land cycle. But again, I think that land cycle is the most important thing they showed us. But I don't think they really showed us that much Bloomburrow because, we're about to see all of it in a week. So, maybe hold off on that for a second. Don't show us half the set. And I think that was a good decision. Now, what they did to show us a fair number of cards from was Duskmourn. They showed us a lot of art and kind of told us a lot about the world of Duskmourn and the riddles that we're going to have to solve and all that stuff, And honestly, looks like a cool set. I see a lot of people not really vibing with the overall, design and direction of the set, but I think it's really cool. I think it's a way to do a horror plane, like Innistrad, for instance, without having to be so traditional and fantasy well, traditional fantasy with your monsters and such, Innistrad was cool. I like vampires and werewolves and zombies and ghosts and stuff like that. Good place to start for a fantasy setting to explore horror. But when it comes to Duskmourn, this is more of like an 80s, slasher flick / horror movie kind of vibe. And I really think that is very cool. And obviously we're taking a ton of inspiration from a ton of different movies from not just the 80s, but even from the modern time period. You can see Stranger Things and stuff like that was obviously an influence on this set. So ultimately, I think that there are cards that are not necessarily to mine or everyone else's taste in this set, but I do like the overall kind of, again, vibe of what they tried in terms of like, a horror themed set. That they wanted to separate as much as they could from Innistrad. I think they did pretty well from what we've seen so far, but that's all just talking about like the set and what it actually is and what it does. We haven't looked at a single card from it yet, so let's start doing that. Now, the first card we're going to look at from the set is not necessarily a bad Magic card by any stretch. I've heard a lot of people talking about it over the last like 24 hours, but I just don't love the design, I guess. Well, that's not true. I don't love the concept. It's Fear of Missing Out. This is 1 and a red for a 2/3 enchantment creature, which is also a nightmare. When it enters, discard a card, draw a card. Also has Delirium, which is for real returning in this set. It's not just on this one card. It's going to be on a bunch of stuff. Whenever Fear of Missing Out attacks for the first time each turn, if there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, untap target creature. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase. So all the people praising this card are absolutely right. It is the best version of a rummage ability, right? It's not an if you do. So if you don't have any cards in your hand, you'll just draw a card when this comes into play, which is pretty sweet. It's a 2-mana 2/3, which isn't the best stat line, but it's also not embarrassing to leave home with a 2-mana 2/3. It's an enchantment creature, so if it goes to the graveyard, or if you discard a copy of itself to itself, then that's half of Delirium right there. If you play this and discard, I don't know, an instant or sorcery or something, then this dies, then that's 3/4 of the way to Delirium right there. So there are very cool things about this card, and overall it might be like the cheapest way to get an extra attack step, even though it's not an extra attack step. It's just one creature gets to attack again. But I don't know, man. There are a lot of obviously great things about the card, and I want to point that out. I think functionally the card might be good, even though I don't really know where it goes. I don't think this is like an aggro creature, even though it looks like it should be. I just probably think there's better 2-drop options, and we can debate all that till the cows come home. But ultimately, like I said, I kind of like the concept of like personified nightmares on this plane, and your nightmares are out to get you and they can kill you. And like, again, these sort of phobic ideas, these phobias translated into enchantment creatures, I think is a really cool idea. And they've already said there's going to be one like, fear of heights and all the stuff that you might assume would be, personified nightmares. But fear of missing out. Okay, but let's move on. Let's move on to the next card, which is Chainsaw, baby. This is a cool card right here, man. I have seen a lot of people putting this card down, and I just don't really understand. This thing looks sweet, man. 2 mana, 1 and a red for an artifact, which happens to be an equipment, and equips for 3. When it enters, it deals 3 damage to up to 1 target creature. Whenever 1 or more creatures die, put a rev counter on the Saw. An equipped creature gets +X+0, and X is the number of rev counters on the Saw, baby. Ring! This is a good Magic card, dude. Like, it's not like Legion Extruder, but like that's about as close as I can come in terms of comparison, at least right now. There's just not a whole lot of equipments that actually like kill something when they come into play. I think there's a couple, but this one's actually really, really playable. I hate that Oni Cold Anvil rotates out of the format well before this set comes out. Can we actually, Wizards, can we keep Oni Cold Anvil in the format? I really want to keep playing with that card, but still Chainsaw would be awesome with it, because you'd sack your artifact creatures or whatever to the anvil and put counters on this, because it cares when any creatures die. So your dudes die in combat or to aristocrat shenanigans or something like that. Then suddenly you're putting a bunch of counters on this. Like you might get through for an extra like 3-4 damage easy on a creature towards the end of the game. And even if you get Wrathed, this is just sitting there. Like if your opponent casts a Wrath not named Sunfall, right? Like they kill all your dudes with a deadly cover up or something. And suddenly Chainsaw just has like 6 counters on it. So, oh cool, I drew a Deep Cavern Bat. I have a 7 power lifelinker. It's pretty good for a removal spell is all I'm saying, you know. It is sorcery speed, but it puts a permanent into play, a very, very relevant permanent type too, for what it's worth. It's also good like with Legion Extruder, right? Because like you play your Legion Extruder, you hit a target for 2 damage, you play your Chainsaw, hit a creature for 3 damage, you sacrifice your Chainsaw to your Extruder, get yourself a 3/3, you're having a pretty good time. So altogether, I think this is just a really cool Magic card that's getting like no real attention. Actually, I should take that back. There are people paying it attention, but it's mostly people saying like, I don't want a chainsaw in Magic. It's like, come on, man, just have fun, you know? Take it easy. Just lighten up. Next is Nowhere to Run. I've been playing Magic for 30 years, dog. I've been playing Magic since Sarah Angel, Send Your Vampire, Shivan Dragon. If I find this okay, there's no reason you shouldn't. Nowhere to Run is up next. Sorry if you don't agree. I love you very much. Please stay around. Nowhere to Run is 2 mana, 1 and a black for an enchantment with flash. When it enters, target creature an opponent controls gets -3/-3 till end of turn. Creatures your opponents control can be the targets of spells and abilities as though they didn't have hexproof. Ward abilities of those creatures don't trigger. Sweet. So we're just in kind of the removal corner right now, even though there is another removal spell we'll look at like way later in the video because I think that spell's awesome. But Nowhere to Run is so sick, dude. This is so cool. If anything, it's a 2 mana enchantment that basically just forget the removal part of it. Don't. The removal part's one of the best parts, but just barring that, 2 mana enchantment for the rest of the game. Hexproof and Ward don't exist. That's really sweet just in a game of Commander, like period. You know, it gets through like multiple equipments that would grant things like Hexproof and Ward, which I think is sweet. And there's obviously tons of Commanders that just have these abilities baked in. So let's go, dude. Like, I think a lot of people have wanted a card like this or multiple cards like this for a good long time. And it's really sweet that we have like a nameless inversion, basically, that not only turns off 2 of the more aggravating abilities in the history of Magic, but that also is an enchantment, which can matter for all kinds of reasons. Just a permanent on the table, not even counting its creature or its card type. Just a permanent on the table might matter for whatever reason. So you can bargain it. You can bargain enchantments, can you not? Am I wrong about that? I think you can bargain enchantments, but either way, just very, 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 very cool card right here that I'm super glad they printed. I think enough people have asked. Next card we'll look at is Twitching Doll in the miscellaneous promos category. This is 2 mana, 1 and a green for a 2/2 artifact creature, Spider Toy. I'm sure it's fine. You can tap for a mana of any color and then put a nest counter on Twitching Doll. You can tap and sacrifice the doll to create a 2/2 green spider creature token with reach for each counter on Twitching Doll. You can only do this at sorcery speed. So there's a few things I don't love about the sorcery speed on this. If you have a bunch of counters on at the beginning of your turn, make sure you do this first before you pass priority to your opponent, or else they'll just kill it and can't get your spiders. But either way, I think this is probably just like a normal... I've seen a lot of people freaking out about this, but it's probably a normal, like, mana dork. You know, if we were going to do top 10 mana dorks in Standard, this would probably be like number 3 or something like that. Like, I might be like underestimating the card like crazy, especially considering it doesn't say that, you know, you sack it and you get a spider for each nest counter. It's just each counter. So if it has a bunch of +1/+1 counters or other kinds of counters or whatever, then you get a spider for all of those. So I'm sure there's some like super fun shenanigans you can do with this and get like 20 spiders all at one time and let's go. And in the meantime, totally functional, normal mana dork. Not embarrassing to put in your deck for the most part. So I do like the card, but again, at the end of the day, mana dork. It's a mana dork that's full of spiders, and that's interesting, but just a mana dork at the end of the day. Next up is Cursed Recording. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 red for an artifact. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a time counter on Cursed Recording. Then, if there are 7 or more time counters on it, remove those counters, and it deals 20 damage to you. Keep that in mind. You can also tap Cursed Recording. This is the good part of the card. When you next cast an instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. So once a turn, you get to copy a spell you're going to cast. Pretty cool, but probably just like way too slow for Standard. Unless you're somehow cheat casting a 9 mana instant or sorcery. You know, like if you have Magma Opus in your deck and you're hoping to cast it, you know, double cast it off of this, then like maybe we're talking. But right now, with what little information we have going into, this set, which comes out in fall. I'm just not sure. There's a whole lot of things that entice me enough to want to double cast them. But, obviously there's a burn deck out there that probably salivates at the thought of this thing. But next, let's look at my dude Toby right here, the Beastie Befriender. And there appears to be a Where the Wild Things reference going on, which I'm a big fan of. This is 3 mana, 2 and a white for a 1/1 legendary human wizard. Toby's a wizard. When he enters the battlefield, create a 4/4 white beast creature token with this creature cannot attack or block alone. As long as you control 4 or more creature tokens you control have flying. When I first read this card, the first 3 times I read it, I was like, it just cares about tokens. So if I have clue tokens, my dudes will get flying. No, it wants you to have creature tokens specifically in play to get the flying. But this reminds me of a couple of things. It reminds me of a Lovestruck Beast, just a little bit. And that's pretty cool. It also weirdly reminds me of a Harbin. If you have a bunch of soldiers, they all get flying. In this case, you just have to have a bunch of token dudes and they all get flying, which is pretty sweet, man. Blinking Toby seems like a pretty cool plan. And we just looked at Salvation Swan out of Bloomburrow, and that goes really well with Toby again on this 3/4 curve where you get Toby, you get 4/4, that's 5/5 in stats on 3, and then the next turn you just play Salvation Swan. Really, you send Toby and the Beast into combat together. When they block Toby, Salvation Swan comes down, you can just blink your Toby, get another 4/4, get a flying Toby and your 3/3 Swan. I don't know. It seems like a pretty good little way to go to me, but who knows if that kind of magic is powerful enough in 2024-25, right? But altogether, Toby's a really, really sweet blink commander, if nothing else. I just like kind of a lot about this card, most of all the design. Up next is a Pokemon card. Is this a Pokemon card? Oh no, it's a Magic card. This is Enduring Tenacity. It just looks an awful lot like a Pokemon card. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 black for a 4/3 enchantment creature, which is also a Snake Glimmer. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. You just get a 4 mana Sanguine Bond. But Dev, it's not an enchantment. Hey, let me finish reading the card. When Enduring Tenacity dies, if it was a creature, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. It's an enchantment. So you do, in fact, get a Sanguine Bond for basically 1 mana less, but you get it twice. If your opponent destroys this somehow, without exiling it, they still have to worry about its actual text still being on the battlefield, which is really, really sweet. Now, I don't want to be fooled multiple times in a row. We just had in Kamigawa, it's about to rotate, the Legendary Dragon cycle. And I love them. I love me some Itsushi. It's one of my favorite cards in Standard. I've been playing that man for 3 years now, 2.5. I'm going to miss when he's gone. But that said, we're in a Sunfall Standard, and there's a bunch of other ways to exile creatures, some of which are rotating, but still. Exile is and will probably remain king for a good long time, so I'm just not really fooled by a death trigger like this. That said, if all your opponent's packing is destroy removal, then all of this cycle, and we already know it's going to be a cycle, is going to get much, much better. But aside from just Enduring Tenacity, we actually saw a couple of different life gain payoffs that are going to be in Duskmourn specifically. So even though we'll be missing Voice of the Blessed in Standard after rotation, there still looks like there's going to be some form of Amalia deck available to play in Standard. And I'm kind of excited about that, but ultimately I think Enduring Tenacity is just going to be great in mostly Commander and even Cube for what it's worth. It's worth something to me, and I have to say it because it's worth something to 3 people watching this video. But speaking of 4 mana life gain payoffs that are also enchantments, man, that's a really narrow category. Let's move on to Layline of Hope. Yeah, Layline of Hope up next. This is 4 mana, sort of. You know the deal with Laylines. It's 2 and 2 white for an enchantment, but of course, if it's in your opening hand, you just throw it onto the table all willy. Just go ahead and do it like a big spender. Oh, I guess I just get this now. If you would gain life, you gain that much life +1 instead. As long as you have at least 7 life more than your starting life total, creatures you control get +2/+2. So you get a Righteous Valkyrie back in Standard, but it doesn't have a body, which sucks and is good at the same time. If I get my Righteous Valkyrie on turn 0, then I guess I'm pretty happy about that. There's definitely places a card like this could go. And again, in Commander, life gain decks pretty much have to have a copy of this card until the end of time. So really sweet thing here, even though the application is very, very narrow, just life gain decks, it's still a pretty powerful card. Let's move along to a fairly exciting lady to see here. This is the Wandering Rescuer, and she's a creature, you'll notice. Just a regular old lady now. She's lost her spark and all that, along with basically everybody else. There's 5 mana now, but again, not really. It's 3 and 2 white for a 3/4 legendary human samurai noble with flash and convoke. There it is. She also double strikes and other tapped creatures you control. Have it a hexproof. Pretty sweet altogether, man. Like, this could cost you, 0 mana, I guess. Like, this could literally cost you 0 mana. We already see a 5 mana white creature with convoke that sees a ton of play in standard in Knight Errant of Eos, which is likely the better card for most aggro decks, right? I would say that if it's a competition between the 2 cards and you can only play one, the Knight Errant is the one that's going to keep seeing play. But if these Boros decks and other aggro decks, right, can fit in like a 1/2 of Wandering Rescuer, I think that they try to, because most of the time you're going to end up paying like 2 mana at the most for your 3/4 double striker with flash. So sometimes this is going to come down and ambush one of your opponent's creatures. Sometimes it's going to come down maybe during your combat step or just before your combat step, and make it to where one of your dudes has hexproof and can continue getting in. So what we kind of see here is a potentially free protection spell that is also a 3-power double striker. And I'm pretty sure that that is one of the most ridiculously powerful Magic cards I've ever seen, if you can get it to pop off right. Now we got 4 more cards to look at today from the Duskmourn, and next is one of my personal favorites. This is Come Back Wrong. I wish they could have come up with a better name for this concept, but at the end of the day, I also kind of feel like it's the perfect name. But anyway, this is 3 mana, 2 and a black for a sorcery. Destroy target creature. If a creature card is put into a graveyard this way, return it to the battlefield under your control. Sacrifice it at the beginning of your next end step. Now, worth noting that you can theoretically kill your own dudes with this and then like repeat their enter the battlefield triggers, especially if they have haste, and attack with them that same turn. But really, you want to hit your opponent's dudes with this. And I know that it's 3 mana sorcery speed removal, which is just not great in terms of most competitive environments, but you know, enter the battlefield triggers are king in not only standard but beyond. So I think there's going to be plenty of targets to hit with this and end up swinging the game like massively in your favor, because now you get that ETB trigger. So pretty cool card. I don't think anyone's going to be playing 4 copies of them anytime soon, but I wouldn't be surprised to see like 1 copy of this sneak into a deck, especially depending on what the meta looks like. Next, I want to look at Doomsday Excruciator. Now, don't bother counting the black mana symbols. I've already done that for you. It is 6. For a second, I read this like 3 times thinking like, is that 7? Is it 5? No, it's 6. Right in the middle. It's 6 black mana symbols. So I guess you throw this in your devotion deck, right? It's a 6/6 demon with flying. And when it enters, if it was cast, each player exiles all but the bottom 6 cards of their library face down. At the beginning of your upkeep, by the way, draw a card. So that should be an upside, but really just means you mill yourself or deck yourself faster than your opponent. But even in standard, all you have to do is play like 1 or 2 decent mill spells, and your opponent has like no real hope of winning the game once this cast trigger goes off. So I don't know. There's a lot of cool angles on this. And I'm not really sure how you get to it in any format. Like even in standard, casting this 6-drop might be a little bit difficult given how much black mana you actually need to get it into play, right? So I'm just not like too sure that it's super competitive playable, but anytime you make a Doomsday reference, you definitely have my attention. It's one of the most powerful cards in all time of all of Magic history. Doomsday is a particularly infamous thing to have access to. So cool card? At the very least, cool card. We'll see if it's good enough, though. Next is Screaming Nemesis, though. This is our next to last card of the day, and I think that it could potentially be the best card of the day, to be honest with you. This is 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 3/3 spirit with haste. When Screaming Nemesis is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to any other target. It's a Boros Reckoner. If a player is dealt damage this way, they can't gain life for the rest of the game. That's pretty gross. Like, really, especially if Duskmourn is going to have like a light sort of life gain theme, then having a Boros Reckoner with like a baked in skull crack that's easier to cast than Boros Reckoner and can also attack the turn it comes into play. This card is pushed, buddy. But finally today, another Pokemon card. I was hoping we'd get another one of these. It's Overlord of the Hotwoods, and Look, I gotta say, I'm poking fun at this frame treatment, but I actually think it looks really rad. And I want one, but apparently you can only get these frame treatments at like a special event they're holding in Japan like one time. So these are going to be like $600 and they'll never have any. But honestly, I'd rather have the Enduring Tenacity than the Overlord anyway. I'm more likely to play that in Commander. I already play Sanguine Bond in LSO Core. Why wouldn't I play Enduring the thing? Tenacity. But anyway, it's a moot point. Again, these cards are going to be super expensive, these frame treatments. But honestly, I should switch to the normal version of this card anyway, so you can see the reminder text, so we finally know what impending does. I guessed about it a couple of times on stream the other night, and we finally got to almost exactly the correct definition. But let me read you the card. It's Overlord of the Hotwoods, 5 mana, 3 and 2 green for a 6/5 enchantment creature. It's an avatar horror. It has impending 4 for 1 and 2 green. That means you can cast this spell for its impending cost, and it enters with 4 time counters on it. It isn't a creature until the last counter is removed. At the beginning of your end step, remove a time counter from it. When Overlord of the Hotwoods enters or attacks, create a tapped colorless land token named Everywhere that is every basic land type. So, on stream the other night, we ended up coming to the conclusion that this would be exactly this ability, but you would remove the counter during your upkeep. It's actually during your end step, which is overall better because it's faster and your creature's going to be able to block, right? And all it's, first. that's kind of neat. But yeah, it was fairly easy to kind of deduce what impending would overall kind of be. Until it isn't, or until it's a creature, it's just an enchantment with no ability to attack or block. But what it also basically is, in that case, in exactly that case, what this effectively is a Topiary Stomper. But like, probably better than Topiary Stomper. Its eventual power and toughness is bigger than Topiary Stomper, although I think Stomper will be able to attack and block much faster than this in most games. Stomper also has Vigilance, which proved to matter in this Wandering Emperor environment, but that card's about to rotate, so I'm not sure how good Vigilance is going to be in the next environment. But worth noting that we won't get our Topiary Stomper replacement until sometime in the fall when Duskmourn comes out, but this will be a really good replacement for it, and it creates a land token, which is nuts. I'm not actually sure that many cards have ever really done that, so pretty sweet to get a land token that is all basic land types and thus just turns on domain. Immediately turns on domain, if I'm not mistaken, much like the Triomes are 3 different basic land types. This land will be all 5, so on turn 3, you just have domain. It's just by resolving the spell, so that's pretty ridiculous too in and of itself. Just really good ramp that fixes you entirely, has every basic land type, turns on domain, is a huge fat creature once you actually can attack and block with it, but even if you never get to that point in the game, Topiary Stomper is a good magic card in and of itself. So I just really like this. Again, I think that of all the cards we've seen today, this has the most chance of making the biggest splash in Standard, but just about everything we looked at today, I think is at least some chance of seeing some amount of Standard play. Like I said, they didn't really skimp on us. We saw a lot of pretty impactful looking cards, even all the way down to Chainsaw, right? And the 2 mana black enchantment, that Nameless Inversion something, the removal spell that also negates hexproof and stuff. Even the sort of lower rarity commons and uncommons and stuff look like they might have some form of relevance. The one thing I gotta say about that new Nameless Inversion that revokes, hexproof and ward, is that I worry that it actually gives them license to print better low cost creatures with ward, but maybe that's just me being paranoid. Paranoid? Paranoid! Had to really stretch to mispronounce that word. It was almost like I did it on purpose, but I didn't. I just sound really paranoid. But again, card running like that, card running around like that in Standard, I feel like they could print a 2 mana 3/3 ward 4 or something. It's not a big deal, right? In their mind. But yeah, that's all the cards that we got to see from both Bloomburrow and Duskmourn. Thanks for hanging out with me for this sort of extended preview video, and make sure you sub, because again, in just a week and a half's time, we're going to start looking at actual Bloomburrow official previews, and I'm sure the first day there's going to be 50 of them, and it's going to be ridiculous. So again, make sure that you stop by for that. Aside from that, just let me know how you felt about all the stuff down there in the comments section. If I missed anything, any interactions or anything like that, hit me with them down there. And of course, I don't have to tell you this. If I got anything wrong, make sure you let me know. Again, you will. I don't have to tell you that. You love doing it. It drives my engagement. Everybody wins. Hit me with it. But aside from that, I guess, the last thing I'll ask you to do is just hit the like button on your way out. I've already asked you to sub to the sandwich, so I won't do that again, even though I just kind of did. Just then I kind of snuck it in right there. But also, if you really want to support the content, just go over to the Patreon. Link in the description if you feel like it. If you feel like it, it's just $1 a month. I feel like I bring $1 worth of content every month into your life, but that's fine. If you don't want to do the Patreon, I'm just glad that you're here. Watch time means a lot too, but in any case, just get down there and let me know how you felt about everything, and I will see you again very, very soon with Bloomburrow previews. We're almost there, man. But anyway, I'm Deb from the Blaze. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.